Wishing everyone a wonderful Passover holiday. We're still in the middle of the Passover holiday, and I want to speak about the anthropomorphization of God that we do. Most of us had a Seder where we've described the way in which God brought us out of Egypt with an outstretched arm. Perhaps we've talked about the plagues that were brought upon the Egyptians, that were brought with the hand of God. They were brought with fingers of God. We speak about God in ways that are very anthropomorphic. We use human attributes to God, but God doesn't have a form. God doesn't have an arm. God doesn't have a hand. God doesn't have fingers. And we talk about God who loves the Jewish people. We talk about God who gets angry. We talk about God who is jealous. God doesn't have feelings. So when we use these terms to describe God, it's for us in our limited way, we who are confined by time, within a framework of time and space, to describe the divine who is outside and created time and space. And so from our limited perspective, we ascribe to God, or God describes himself to us with these attributes: God who loves, God who gives, God who is jealous, God who is angry. But it's for our benefit, and it perhaps limits the expansiveness and the Ein Sofness, the unlimitedness of God when we do that. However, we do it to help us understand what it means. We perceive God in the world. We have the capacity to perceive God. We have the capacity to connect to God, which is an amazing thing, that we, the finite being, have within ourselves a soul, a divine soul. And that soul is yearning and craving and desiring a relationship, a connection to the divine from which it came, from which it's being sourced, from which its source is. And so the holiday of Passover, as much as we talk about freedom, the holiday of Passover is a holiday of love. It's love that the Jewish people have for God, because that's the way we have perceived God through this story. We talk about the coming out of Egypt on Passover, but we actually talk about it every single day. We talk about it in the Shema prayer. We talk about it over and over in our liturgy every single day, every Shabbat, every holiday. We talk about the coming out of Egypt because it is the foundation of our relationship to God, is to understand that unconditional love that God is pouring into the world, that God is love, God is goodness, and that's what's coming into the world. Can we feel it? Can we connect to it? That's up to us. Can we put ourselves in the flow? Can we line ourselves up? That's our job. So we understand that our anthropomorphizing God is for our benefit. But we also have to recognize that that anthropomorphic language is limited. God is limitless, is unlimited. God is transcendent, but God is also immanent. And the Passover story is a reality of God pulling out the Jewish people from within another nation, literally extracting them out, pulling them out, bringing them into the desert, dividing the Reed Sea, parting the sea so the Jewish people could come into the desert, bringing them to Mount Sinai to have a revelation and receiving the Torah. That was considered a marriage of the Jewish people to God when we got to Mount Sinai and we received the Torah. There was a marriage, so to speak. On the Sabbath of Passover, this Sabbath, we're going to read a Megillah called Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, which some say was written by King Solomon. And in it, it's described as a love affair. It's a love affair between the Jewish people and God. Our perception of God is that he is good, that's loving, limitless, unconditional, and that's the way we perceive God. When he pulled us out of Egypt, when he brought us into the desert, when he brought us to Mount Sinai, he sustained us, he brought us to Israel. All of this goodness that we receive, that we can receive, that we are able to receive, is till today. We have that capacity to relate to God that way, and that's That's why we repeat it over and over and over again. Understand, Jewish people, that God acts in loving, unconditionally loving ways always. And perhaps we don't think of that as a Jewish concept, that God loves us, that God loves us, God is giving to us. That's our understanding of what it means that God loves. God doesn't have feelings, but God acts in a way in the world that we perceive as loving. In Shir HaShirim, in this Song of Songs, there's a sentence which is very similar to the language in the Passover story. It says in Shir HaShirim, "Behold, the voice of my beloved comes, skipping over the mountains, hopping over the valleys." Nothing stops God's love, God's desire, God's, again, language that's anthropomorphic. God desires. God is putting love into the world. There's an energy flow of love into the world. God is love. God is flowing good energy into the world. And we recognize that, and we are happy because of that. We're grateful for that. We live our lives understanding that that's the bedrock of the way the world is created, is with kindness and with goodness and with love. So now we're in this period between Passover and the holiday of Shavuot, of when we receive the Torah. 7 weeks. We have 7 weeks now to go from the second day of Passover until the day that we receive the Torah at Mount Sinai. 7 weeks. And in that 7 weeks, we count the days. Each day, each week has a character trait associated with it that relates to the Sefirot. The Sefirot are God's energy flow into the world, God's expression, the way God communicates into the world, that giving light into the world. So the first one we work at, the one we're working on now, the one we're acknowledging now, is the attribute as the Sefirah of Chesed, of kindness, of love, of giving. God is putting that energy into the world. And so too, we're created in the image of God. So too, we have that aspect, that element, that attribute of kindness. And it's our job this week of the spheres of the attribute of kindness, to work on being kinder, to work on loving love, to love. How do we love? Let's examine how we love. Let's try to love more. Let's try to be more unconditional. Let's work on ourselves to have greater emotion in our love, and greater capacities to give, greater capacities to know when to stop giving, when it's not the right thing to just give and give and give and give, that we become a shmata, like to have some constraint to that, and so on. And so we spend 7 days working on the attribute of kindness. And then after that week, we have another week where we work on the attribute of limitation, of boundaries, and so on, until we get to the end of the 7 weeks, when we've gone through all of the different sefirot, all the different attributes that line us up, us finite human beings with a infinite soul, line us up with the way in which God is communicating into the world. And so these are just some of the ideas of things that I was thinking over this holiday as we now enter into the last couple of days on Shabbat and Sunday, the last 2 days outside of Israel of the holiday of Passover. But to think of the holiday of Passover, yes, it's about freedom. Yes, it's about God bringing us out. It's a story of love. And that's why we read Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, Love of Love, the way in which God is infusing and putting into the world an energy that we perceive as loving. It's our perception, it's our description of the way we relate to God, is a God who is giving, who is loving, who is all good. You might not feel that way always. And there's plenty of suffering and there's plenty of hardship. And that's where we kind of, understand that our perception is limited. We don't understand the full picture. We don't understand the ways of God. We don't understand why they're suffering. We understand that in the future we will see it with clarity, but right now we don't see it that way. We have to, on some level, have a leap of faith, so to speak. We have to have some faith that it is God is all good and it will all work out in the end. But in the meantime, I think that I want to focus on the fact that our anthropomorphisms, we have to understand that they are our way of understanding God, and that God isn't that doesn't have an arm, doesn't have a hand, doesn't have fingers, doesn't have feelings, but the way in which we perceive God as if he used an outstretched arm to bring the Jewish people out, as if he brought the plagues with his fingers, as if there's a feeling of love that's being pushed into the world through the spheres, through these different spheres. So that's, I hope everybody has a very uplifting Passover. I hope everybody is able to open themselves up and feel the love of God in the world and the goodness that's here to be had. And I hope that we all enjoy the rest of our holiday and come out onto the other side. You know, we're going to go through the Red Sea this weekend, and we're going to come out the other side, and now we have that journeying. We're journeying towards Sinai to get the Torah, and we're working on ourselves, and we're working on these different attributes, so that when we get to that point on Shavuos, when we get to that receiving of the Torah place, that we've improved ourselves along the way.